Special thanks to the Blackknife Melee, jojobod, and anyone else that asked for the suggestion. Sorry for the wait, I appreciate your patience, and I hope you enjoy. To know your opponent is to know victory. In the world of martial arts, and really anything where you're competing against another person, being able to predict your opponent's next move and react accordingly before they act is an invaluable skill. Not only does it allow for you to cut off or eliminate their attempts at victory, or to otherwise put themselves in an advantageous position, but it affords you the opportunity to, in turn, use the failure of the opponent and their probable surprise at this to give yourself a massive advantage, sometimes even a competition-ending one. This is the fundamental basis of one of the most incredibly useful and high-level skills in all of Grappler Baki, the Ultra High Level Sen-no-Sen. To achieve the accolade of being considered one of the most high-level skills in Grappler Baki, a series with roughly 30 years of insanely high-level martial arts skills, Ultra High Level Sen-no-Sen has proven to be the absolute pinnacle of predictive ability, a skill that's already both incredibly vital and incredibly difficult to develop into a valuable part of one's martial arts arsenal. To achieve said skill, one must face death. But it's not enough to simply face death in some instances once or twice. To develop this skill, Musashi had to participate in multiple wars, including the Battle of Sekigahara, one of the most violent and brutal battles in Japanese history, and in over 60 duels to the death, where entire fights and whether or not you would live or die was decided in a single strike. At first, it's all about reacting. Then you begin to be able to read and predict the moves of your opponent, and you're able to create tactics and strategies based on being able to read your opponent's moves and predict their actions beforehand. Finally, at the peak of predictive ability, one can perceive and intercept the very brain signals that call the opponent's body to action, quite literally reading their mind. Now, at first glance, this may just seem like a work of fiction. Baki is a fictional manga after all, but don't be so quick to dismiss everything in Baki as entirely made up. To explain the Ultra High Level Sen-no-Sen, let's first take a look at prediction in martial arts and what reading someone's moves actually means. First, to even begin to be able to predict a person's moves, one must master other vital skills first, before then building upon those to begin to develop the ability to read movements. Skills such as distance management and spacing, where inches can be the difference between being in relative safety and getting your head knocked off. Then you start observing certain parts of the body whose movements belie the opponent's intentions, parts like their eyes to see what on you they're targeting, their hips to see how they'll attack, and their feet to figure out how and where they'll move. Once you've developed spacing and keeping track of key parts of the body, especially the feet, while also fighting, you then try to notice tells for their attacks. Where are they looking? Do they move in any particular way before attacking? Is there noticeable tension anywhere on their body? You have to be able to decipher all of that information while keeping track of those key body parts and maintaining proper distancing, all while not giving away that you're reading an opponent's moves, or else they'll start throwing in feints, which just add another massive layer of complication to the whole process. When you've done all of that, you've cultivated all the necessary skills to read an opponent's movements and mastered said skill. It's at that level of mastery where you can begin to track rhythm. You've figured out tells, or when an opponent acts a certain way or does a certain thing before taking a specific action, giving away beforehand what they plan to do, but rhythm is more wide-scale. An opponent's rhythm is how they move in general, things like when they attack and defend, how they bob their head and how that changes in response to stimulus, how they shift their eyes, their style, their habits, the whole gambit. Active observation becomes passive, subconscious, because you know how they'll attack, how they'll think, how their style operates. You know the wrestler is going to drop before shooting in, the karateka is going to bring their knee up before kicking, the nakmoi is going to swing their leg like a baseball bat. At most, you'll still have to keep track of the opponent's elbows and knees to know when a punch or elbow or kick or knee or whatever is coming, but at the highest levels of mastery, you can figure out how your opponent thinks after only brief observation, which allows you to predict with a fairly high accuracy what they'll plan to do. There's no proper science behind being able to predict an opponent. You just have to develop your ability to detect telegraphs of intent until you're at an acceptable percentage of accuracy across the board. It's even possible to sense the intent of an attack without any visual cues, as is done with the 5th Dan Black Belt test of Bujinkan Ninjutsu. That level isn't entirely practical for combat, but mastery of action anticipation at a general fundamental level is a critical skill that research has shown gives one a major advantage through an understanding of the opponent's body mechanics and movements. The dynamics of movement play an important part in predictive abilities, but when you get to a level as high as Musashi, where one movement decides the fight, even things like the recognition of facial emotions play an integral role in action anticipation. In short, superior action prediction skills correlate to strategies of memory, visual searching, and body kinematic information extraction, but the highest levels involve the process of learning who your opponent is, what they're capable of, and how they instinctively move. It's all about being able to notice the telegraphs of attacks, how certain attacks, combos, and techniques are chained together, and it's about your ability to stay calm, employ forethought, and process information provided by intense familiarity in a dynamic and rapidly developing situation. With that, you can predict certain reactions based on natural responses to threats, as well as style and habits. And you can identify the flow of the fight, like how an opponent may defend after attacking due to their attack leaving them open to a counter, and you can take advantage of this knowledge. At the end of the day, no matter what style one practices, in order for someone to make a move, their brain has to have thought of that move first. Seems simple enough, right? Well, because the brain thinks of an action before the body performs it, the body will always give a subconscious signal of what it intends to do as commanded by the brain. With Metsuke, or the art of observation, you can notice certain tics, like the opponent's eyes widening, their nostrils flaring, them inching forward, or them swaying in a certain way, and eventually, you'll be able to use your Makushin, or your mind's eye, to know the person's thought process and personal style and habits, rather than having to predict based on specific movements. That's why prediction is one of the core processes of fighting. One must observe, orient yourself based on what you've observed, decide what to do with the information gained, and act out what you decided. That's touching on the Ultra High Level Sen-no-Sen, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. To avoid putting the cart before the horse, let's actually talk about what Sen-no-Sen actually is. Sen-no-Sen is one of the 3 basic strategies in Japanese martial arts called Mitsu-no-Sen, or the 3 strikes, that are used to attack your opponent. Go-no-Sen, to attack after your opponent's attack has already begun, Sen-no-Sen, to attack during the attack, and Sen Sen-no-Sen, to attack before the opponent attacks. An example of Sen-no-Sen would be something like Baki's 0.5 second unconscious skill, or pre-initiative from Kengan, whereas an example of Sen Sen-no-Sen would be something more like perfect determinate prediction, but each strategy has different levels and advantages. Go-no-Sen at a basic level would be blocking a punch and counter-striking, Sen-no-Sen would be dodging and counter-striking simultaneously, and finally Sen Sen-no-Sen would be striking a person before they got the chance to throw the strike they're intending to throw. In general, Sen Sen-no-Sen is the highest level and the most ideal strategy, but a true master of combat knows the strengths and weaknesses of all 3. For example, Baki's 0.5 second unconscious skill allows for him to attack before others, before their brain has a chance to consciously register information and signal the muscles to action. However, Musashi defeats his technique with Sen-no-Sen. How is this possible? Well, it's because Musashi's Sen-no-Sen is so high level, it operates like Sen Sen-no-Sen against predictive strategies. If someone uses pre-initiative, they're predicting how you'll move and act to attack you beforehand, but because you're acting before motion has begun, if your opponent's predictive skill is high enough, they can in turn predict this action and react accordingly. The unique quality of Musashi's Sen-no-Sen that makes it unpredictable is that, like with normal Sen-no-Sen, he predicts action and moves simultaneously, leaving the opponent with no time to predict or counter as he's attacking during the attack, but Musashi's prediction takes his opponent's prediction into account, which is how he beat Baki. There's no time to change your action at that point because the action had already begun. It's already in the process of currently happening and your prediction has been predicted. Sen-no-Sen requires one to read the intent of their opponent and act on that with perfect fluidity to hit before the opponent can move. Go-no-Sen is more so about detecting the intent to attack and counter-striking an opening, though it's considered the weakest of the 3 as it's the only one of the Mitsu-no-Sen that's reactionary. And Sen Sen-no-Sen is basically baiting somebody into a certain action, controlling their action, kinda like Kanada's spider web. Now, Go-no-Sen isn't necessarily just a counterattack, it's specifically post-initiative, so it's more about capitalizing on a movement observed, making it a counterattack only if you're capitalizing on an opening in an attack you've observed. An example of Go-no-Sen not being a counterattack would be seeing an opponent's feet cross while moving and shooting in for a takedown. You're not countering an attack, but you noticed that their feet crossed, which would make it harder for them to defend against a takedown, so you took advantage of that observation. Sen-no-Sen is countering simultaneously when the opponent attacks. That's what we're talking about with most predictive abilities in martial arts mangas. Identifying an opponent's movements and positioning, and then countering the attack as it's happening. Sen Sen-no-Sen is the only one of the three strikes in which you are the one attacking preemptively, something that, funnily enough, both Musashi and Gaia in Baki would be capable of, as they can both read a person's mind. Something Matobe points out as being distinctly different from simply reading a person's moves, something anyone can do given enough time or experience. We're told as much in Baki and Musashi's first encounter as well. Musashi noticed and perceived the signal Baki's brain gave off before Baki tried to jab him. Half a second before his body moved to jab, Musashi caught the signal. During the half a second delay between thought and action, when the human brain is essentially unconscious because the brain is sending signals to the body to move, those signals taking half a second to be received and acted upon, Musashi was able to notice that signal, react before Baki's body set into motion, and stop Baki's jab before it even happened. Again in their final fight, Baki attempts to capitalize on the neural signal transmitted before the half second of conscious thought by stopping Musashi's attack by restraining his arms and kneeing him in the face. But in turn, Musashi caught onto the half second before Baki was conscious again and countered his knee strike by flipping him. Baki predicted and stopped Musashi's attack and tried to knee him, but Musashi predicted Baki's reaction and countered it. Then Musashi intends to do something else, and Baki capitalizes on the half second preceding the action, where the brain is signaling Musashi's body to move, but the whole thing was a setup, and Musashi dodges and counters Baki's 0.5 second unconscious attack. In this instance, Musashi baited Baki into attacking, so that was Sen Sen-no-Sen. So to review, Sen, seizing the initiative, or attacking, one of the central points in the teachings of Miyamoto Musashi, so basically one of his signature techniques, as we see accurately reflected in Baki, is typically employed when your opponent is about to attack, when your attack has been parried, or when your attack has failed. In the Book of Fire, Musashi wrote about taking the three initiatives. Sen-no-Sen, or attacking your opponent before he initiates the attack he's already decided on, commonly referred to in karate as Diaiwaza, or to take the initiative at the moment of understanding the encounter, Go-no-Sen, or to attack your opponent after he has taken the initiative, and Tai-no-Sen, or to attack your opponent when he attacks you. Sen-no-Sen, the initiative of the attack, would be attacking directly before an attack is launched and either not being in the way of it or dodging it. Go-no-Sen, the initiative of the body, would be to parry or block an attack knowing already what your opponent was going to do, predict the attack and subsequent counter, and then use a counterattack before him, which is generally used by default since the ability to read an opponent is easier the later they are into the action. And Tai-no-Sen, the initiative of waiting, would basically be pretending to have some kind of opening to induce a response that you can counter, with the most common examples in modern time being lowering your guard in boxing to bait a straight so you can counter with a cross, hook, or uppercut, dropping your hands in kickboxing to bait a high kick so that you can leg kick the support leg and get a knockdown with a sweep, or to throw a striking feint at the opponent's face in MMA to draw your opponent's attention upwards so that you can immediately level change and shoot for a takedown. It's worth noting here that, while we are talking specifically about Musashi's Ultra High Level Sen-no-Sen, since he was the first person to codify the three initiatives, it's hardly an assumption to say that he's a peerless master of all three Sens. In any case, as Musashi himself wrote in his book Go-rin no Sho, specifically in the Book of Void written in 1643 to 1645, to master the Sens, you've basically got to master the 0.5 second unconscious skill, or as Musashi put it in real life, the mind must be open and at one with the body, so the dwell on the execution is removed, and thus the lag that is critical to the use of Sen is removed. He further described it in his Book of Water as the strike of non-thought, to strike without having consciously thought of it beforehand. Like what Bruce Lee is talking about when he says that he doesn't strike, the strike just happens. That's a level of mastery that I don't think anyone else in fiction has reached. Not without just straight up making up fantasy stuff anyways. To circle back to what I was talking about before with building and mastering predictive abilities, where you go from basics like distance management and watching parts of your opponent's body to figuring out their style and habits to finally figuring out how they move and think, those are actually the 4 stages of mastering Sen. Unconscious incompetence, where you're incorrectly predicting your opponent because you don't know what you're doing. Conscious incompetence, where you know what to do, but you aren't very good at it yet. Conscious competence, where you're good at predicting your opponent, but only when you're making an active effort to do so. And finally, unconscious competence, where you no longer have to actively observe your opponent and their movements to predict their actions. When you've mastered this, the differences of Sens then only become a matter of timing, where Go-no-Sen is simply a subconscious counter after a predicted attack has been launched as a matter of reflex. Sen-no-Sen is attacking at the same time the threat is realized, basically a stop hit, the basis of Bruce Lee's Way of the Intercepting Fist, Jeet Kune Do, and Sen Sen-no-Sen just becomes attacking before your opponent. What makes Musashi Sen-no-Sen so exceptional, so ultra high level, is that he can literally read your mind and predict your predictions. Well, I think that about does it for this combat clarification video. Let me know what you guys think about Ultra High Level Sen-no-Sen in the comments down below. I think it's pretty awesome, and it's definitely one of the premier showings of martial arts skill in fiction for me. This was the move that, for me, cemented Baki as a #1 contender for most skilled verse in fiction. Or at least this move and the final Baki vs Musashi fight in general was what made me realize that Baki was, as a series, definitely in the higher part of the upper echelon of skill verses. Again, special thanks to everyone that suggested this. I had a blast doing the research for this video and even learned something new myself. That Miyamoto Musashi in real life basically created the Mitsuno-Sen, like he codified it in written record. At least he did in modern history, not sure if there were any Europeans or Greeks or whatever have you in ancient times that figured out the same concept, but still. Be sure to leave a like on the video if you learned something new as well, or if you enjoyed the video. If we can get this video to 100 likes within a week of uploading, my next combat clarification video will be on one of the most gruesome techniques in all of Grappler Baki, the signature technique of Gaia, the tunnel. Subscribe if you want to keep up with combat clarification video releases. Hit the notification bell to be updated on when I upload. I've got some fun videos planned, like more Kengan Maximum and another What If battle featuring Grappler Baki and Sakamoto days. A video that's probably gonna get me a lot of flack from both communities. Join the channel Discord server if you want to join a Discord server with about 100 people and maybe 10 active users. And follow me on Twitter at RedFox4262 for dumb memes and video updates. I've also been considering starting a Patreon. Let me know what you guys think of that too. Well, I've been Red Fox, the wild YouTuber, and this has been Combat Clarification Grappler Baki Techniques Explained. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.